Good morning, Liberty. It is Wednesday morning, March 13th, 2019. My name is Michael Bolden, broadcasting live through the 10th Amendment Center channel on YouTube from here in my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happen to be tuning in live or in the archive, all that good stuff. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. Now, this episode, we're going to talk about facial recognition. We talked about emerging surveillance technologies a number of times on this show, and in fact, facial recognition a pretty good number of times, biometrics, thermal imaging, basically the ways that they're deploying what we would maybe have thought of as very futuristic technologies from a sci-fi movie a few years ago are being tested in small areas or tested on foreigners, and eventually, I think, expanded to everybody. Because I feel like, and I've always felt this in regards to whatever they do, whether it was using drones for surveillance or gun control, they basically test it out in small areas or in other countries or on international people here from visiting from other countries, people who aren't U.S. citizens. And then once they really get the system down, they really like to expand that to their own to their own residents here in the U.S. So, before getting to that, I do want to say hi to some friends out in the live chat. I really appreciate everybody who joins me for the live show. I love doing the live show; it's really cool and fun. To Larry Clark, Bob Brewer, EHP Training, Tyler B, Free Helicopter Rides. That's a new screen name that I haven't seen before. Cool. Welcome to the show. Oh, it's Matt Hugh. Awesome. Change the screen name. Got to do that every now and then. Existence, Joe Standridge, Aqualung, Ward Lawrence, Keith the Hat Guy. First time watching live. Awesome. Welcome. Really glad you're here. Also, Ken Clark. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I really, really appreciate it. And let's get right into the information here that was released just this week. Actually, just on Monday morning, the Electronic Privacy Information Center, EPIC, released 364 pages of documents that they got through a FOIA request on what Customs and Border Protection wants to do regarding facial recognition. Let me pull this up here. So I've got all the links here in the show notes here on YouTube, and of course over at 10thamendmentcenter.goodmorningliberty. I'm not going to go through all the details of this, but if you want the link to it and you want to read through it and find some information, it's all there. So this is where you'd start. But they released the report exclusively to, of all places, BuzzFeed News, who actually did a very good report on it. And it's titled here, you can see watching the video, "The U.S. government will be scanning your face at 20 top airports, documents show." Now, of course, they start out talking about the current president, Mr. Trump. In March 2017, President Trump issued an executive order expediting the deployment of biometric verification of the identities of all travelers crossing U.S. borders. That mandate stipulates facial recognition identification for 100% of all international passengers, including American citizens, in the top 20 U.S. airports by 2021. So just a couple of months into his presidency, President Trump issued this executive order saying we need to kind of ramp it up with everybody crossing the border. Doesn't matter if you're a citizen or not. And then we're going to collect facial recognition. Now, in order to do that, mind you, they have to have a permanent database, because the way that the whole facial recognition system works, if they want to use it for check-in or expedited processing, whatever it may be, they have to be able to match it against their database. So what is happening is they're building a massive international database of people's faces. Let's go a little bit further. So U.S. Customs and Border Protection is, quote, scrambling to implement this biometric entry-exit system with the goal of using facial recognition technology on travelers aboard 16,300 flights per week, or more than 100 million passengers traveling on international flights out of the U.S. in as little as 2 years, to meet Trump's accelerated timeline. And this is, I just want to pause here before reading the rest of the sentence. For many people who only read 2 paragraphs and read a headline, And unfortunate truth, people who primarily digest their information on places like Reddit, Facebook, Twitter, elsewhere, even if they're Googling things, there are studies, and I have to find it, I haven't seen one in recent years, but it's around 2/3 of people never scroll. I mean, just flat out, they never scroll. So they only see what's called the lead article and the title, maybe this subtitle, and they don't ever get any details. So if someone is only reading the top of this on their phone, they're probably only getting the first paragraph and they're like, oh man, Trump is bad. He's pushing this facial recognition thing on everybody. It's going to scoop up U.S. citizens. The only way to do this is by getting facial recognition on everybody if you're thinking it through. But what they're missing then, of course, or very likely, is that Trump's, and I agree, what Trump is doing on this is bad. It's dangerous. It's mass warrantless surveillance. The Fed shouldn't be involved in doing this at all. But it's not just Trump. Trump is just speeding things up. It was actually a law signed by Barack Obama, I think in 2015. Obama signed into law a biometric system was going to be required, basically doing what President Trump is doing. So those of you who think that Obama's the bad guy, you have to acknowledge that Trump is doing the exact same thing that Obama wanted him to do when he could actually choose to not do it. Or maybe he could sign an executive order to slow it down. Let's start doing some studies. We don't know how this is going to play out. He could do all kinds of strategic things to slow it down. And those of you who think, oh, it's all Trump, the only thing that ever bad that ever happens starts and ends with Donald J. Trump. You're lying to yourself, because a lot of what Trump does, and in fact, what every president, when they do something bad, they generally are building upon what the previous administration did. And that administration built on what the previous administration, the previous. And that's kind of an aside, but I did want to point that out because there's a lot of talk, of course, because it's BuzzFeed, there's a lot of talk about the Trump administration. And while I agree with the tone there, because I oppose this type of mass surveillance and I oppose this kind of future technology being run by the U.S. government because they cannot be trusted, but I can't at the same time point fingers just at one person. It's the entire system. And then the head guy has actually been driving it from multiple administrations. So that is kind of a little bit of a rant. So this is a biometric system that had initially been signed into law. Let me click into that. I think it was 2016. So it was passed in 2015. Of course, an Appropriations Act was probably some kind of a rider. They do hundreds and hundreds of pages of this kind of stuff, and they add all kinds of unconstitutional spending garbage. They should all be vetoed, really, every single one of them. But Obama, of course, signed that. Maybe he even asked for it. Who knows? So they go on, and they talk about the Customs and Border Protection who's implementing this with DHS, TSA, and they're partnering with the private businesses, the airlines, the airports in some situations, ones that are not necessarily, quote, publicly or government owned. They say, quote, CBP is solving a security challenge by adding a convenience for travelers. Of course, it's sold to us as being convenient, just like TSA pre-check. Hand over your life, hand over your history, hand over a permanent record of your face where we can monitor you and match it in the blink of an eye or less, and it'll be just more convenient for you to travel. That's the way they sell these things to us, unfortunately. He says, by partnering with airports and airlines, this is from a spokesperson writing to BuzzFeed, by partnering with airports and airlines to provide a secure standalone system that works quickly and reliably, which they will integrate into their boarding process, CBP does not have to rebuild everything from the ground up as we drive innovation across the travel experience. Oh, it sounds like just like, an innovating business, some federal agency. Now, where I think both Epic and BuzzFeed really get off the rails, besides, and Epic doesn't necessarily point out, they're consistent where it comes to everybody's violating privacy. Every administration is going crazy with this kind of stuff. But where BuzzFeed kind of also goes off the rails on this is they tend to focus on, the article primarily focuses on the fact that CBP is rushing to implement this. It's haphazard. They've skipped over parts of the procedure to implement it. And I'm less concerned about that. Here's what they say. The documents also suggest that Customs skipped portions of a critical rulemaking process which requires the agency to solicit public feedback before adopting technology intended to be broadly used on civilians, something privacy advocates back up. Yeah, I mean, I get it. I get the idea that when they implement a new approach, there's a feedback, there's a public comment time, and then they review that, and then they do what they want. So, for example, the new unconstitutional bump stock ban from the Trump administration through the ATF, which shouldn't exist. Of course, they had a public comment time for feedback. That, of course, is rarely widely pushed, and I don't think they really respond too much. I mean, maybe it's just kind of testing the waters. I don't know. I haven't thought about it too much. But it seems to me like they're like, oh, here's your chance to beg and plead. But when it gets down to it, we're in charge and we're going to make the decision that we feel is best. And we don't care about your rights or we don't care about your concerns or any of it. They're going to do what they want to do no matter what. So BuzzFeed is concerned about this process. I'm less concerned about process than I'm concerned about government having the power or having a database of everyone's face in it. And I think it actually is far worse than this international travel situation. I mentioned that briefly to start, but we'll go on this a little bit further. The ACLU reported that Amazon's facial recognition technology falsely matched 28 members of Congress with arrest mugshots. And I covered this in a previous episode, which I have a link to here in the show notes as well, where ACLU is primarily concerned about the racial impact. And it is real. I mean, it's real. Facial recognition systems disproportionately, when they come up with error, it is people of communities of color. So it's just how it plays out. But that isn't the concern. I don't want everyone to have their rights equally violated. Certainly, it is worse for people who are getting mismatched. That is certainly worse, and I don't think anyone should discount that because it's based on a talk about race, for example. And of course that's bad. But to just say, okay, it almost is like making the argument that as long as that isn't a mismatch, as long as it isn't disproportionately affecting communities of color, then we don't have a complaint. That's what that tells me. No. That's almost actually encouraging them to be worse. But here's what Epic has to say about it, and I think they're a little bit more consistent on the privacy issue here. I think it's important to note what the use of facial recognition in airports, well, they put that in brackets, so I'm not sure if that's the full quote. They just says what the use of facial recognition means for American citizens, said Jeremy Scott, the director of Epic's domestic surveillance project, told BuzzFeed. Quote, it means the government, without consulting the public, a requirement by Congress, or consent from any individual, is using facial recognition to create a digital ID of millions of Americans. CBP took images from the State Department that were submitted to obtain a passport and decided to use them to track travelers in and out of the country. Man, they're literally, so if you've got a passport, probably in recent times, maybe at all times, anytime they had an electronic record, they're basically using that, and that is their starting point. We know that FBI has been building the next-gen database. We know through ISE, the information sharing environment, which was part of the post-Patriot Act era, that everybody's sharing everything with everybody. I often refer to my episode on automated license plate readers titled 2.5 billion, that when a small government agency or a local police department scans your location and stores the data of all the places you go in a small town, everyone everywhere has it. All law enforcement agencies, state and federal, who participate in this, and I'm going to assume it's basically all of them, have access to the data. So if you're submitting to the State Department your passport, you're submitting your image to the DMV, I will just assume at this point that everyone is sharing that information and they're using that as the starting point to do facial recognition database. And then on top of it, and I don't have any proof, but I'm assuming that, again, Facebook, because all the data is being shared, as you share your information to Facebook, which is incredibly good at this facial recognition technology, Amazon as well, who sells the technology to police departments. All this information is being shared everywhere. And the more that they use it, the more that they test it out, the more that they improve the AI, the more that they get better at it, and the more that they can expand it to other areas. Now, mind you, a few years ago, it was just the idea of doing it. When Obama signed it into law, okay, well, this has got to happen. Well, then, of course, the next president comes in, and then they have to accelerate it. So a little further, Jay Stanley at ACLU said this: "It's an extremely powerful surveillance technology that has the potential to do things never before done in human history." Let me read that again. It's an extremely powerful surveillance technology that has the potential to do things never before done in human history. That's far different than what the government person says. We're solving a security challenge by adding a convenience for travelers. Not mass surveillance, powerful surveillance, something that's never been done. Think about that. What could it be used for? We don't even know necessarily. I mean, certainly some experts can probably give us more information on what it could be used or how it could be used. And then, of course, our imagination. Films, books, and the like. We can use our imagination on how this type of technology can be used. And Jay goes on and he says, "Yet the government is hurtling along a path towards its broad deployment. And in this case, a deployment that seems quite unjustified and unnecessary." And man, come on, ACLU. You should be better than that, at least on surveillance, even if you're a partisan hacks on other things. And Jay Stanley is generally very good because he focuses heavily on surveillance issues, and he's usually very good. But the political statement that goes along with it, so he makes the liberty-based statement talking about surveillance technology, the fact that this is a new kind of futuristic thing. We don't know. It's never been used in history. And then he goes on and says, oh, it's unjustified. Well, what justified situation do they have to have a database of everyone's face? I mean, to me, there's zero. None. Ever. Because they cannot be trusted. And persons, houses, papers, and effects to be searched and seized under the Fourth Amendment, I think your face is your person. To have a record of that and to search it without a warrant is a clear violation of the Fourth Amendment. A warrant based on probable cause describing the person or place to be searched or seized. So they're doing both. They're searching you, and then because of technology, they're seizing a digital fingerprint of your face. They're doing both. So there is zero situation where the government has the authority under the Constitution, none that is justified or necessary, unless, of course, they get a warrant based on probable cause, saying that this person needs to have a search of their person. Now, of course, Customs and Border Protection tells us that there shouldn't be, and this is how the report puts it, there shouldn't be any privacy concerns around its biometric facial recognition program. No concern. Of course, there's no mention, and of course, BuzzFeed, the place that a lot of constitutionalists loves to hate. They do a good job reporting on the facts. The political kind of commentary in here is kind of so-so. And I'm trying to point out the things as I go, some of my complaints with it. But there is no mention of the Fourth Amendment. I don't know. Let's Command F. Oh, there it is. The only mention, 1, in the U.S., there are no laws governing the use of facial recognition. Yes, there is. There's the Fourth Amendment. Because if you're searching someone's face, you're searching their person, and that is covered under the Fourth Amendment. It's very straightforward. So this is actually bad. They're pointing out that courts have not ruled on whether it constitutes a search under the Fourth Amendment. We don't have to read the Fourth Amendment. You and I shouldn't understand what the Fourth Amendment has to say. We have to wait for the courts to tell us. I mean, you and I know that if they're scanning your face, they are searching your face. Without a doubt. But we have to wait for a court to tell us whether that constitutes a search. Okay, thanks, BuzzFeed. Appreciate that. Well, Customs and Border Protection, along with with BuzzFeed News, who is supposedly is opposing them, are taking the same position, that there's no concern about the Fourth Amendment here at all. What does the Electronic Frontier Foundation have to say about this? This was their tweet on it. I think everyone was kind of surprised about this because EFF normally would be out in the forefront reporting on this. They had to say where to begin with the problems on this program. To start, quote, it threatens privacy on a mass scale. Absolutely. They don't mention that it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment on a mass scale. So it's unfortunate that they mention that. They focus on the data being not reliable. Well, over time, the more that they do this, EFF's tweet is not going to age well. And so are these comments about it disproportionately affecting communities of color, because over time, the more that they do this with hundreds of millions of people, it's just going to get so good that this type of argument, you're going to look back on it and they're going to be making the case that, well, EFF was concerned and EFF is so good on this and they were concerned about the data not being reliable. Well, I know we had some problems for those first 2 years and a number of people, had their rights violated, but thankfully that's over with. It's now only 1 in 100 million. Because we've gotten so good after violating so many rights, because that's basically how I see it playing out in the years to come. I don't think this type of argument should be made at all, because in the future, as they use it anyways, because they're going to use it anyways, this is going to be used as an argument in favor of it. Oh, this has all been solved. And they're going to ignore it threatens privacy. They're going to ignore anyone talking about things like that, and they're going to focus on this, and they're going to use the violation of all of our rights to improve their technology, and then all these privacy groups are going to look bad. I mean, they're actually helping out. I don't think it's intentional, because I like Electronic Frontier Foundation. I like Epic, and I sometimes like ACLU, and I sometimes can't stand them, but when they're good, they're good. But in this case, they're saying some good things, but at the same time, I think they're encouraging problems in the long run, in the big picture. They're also talking about agencies aren't saying anything about how they will protect this highly sensitive information. Well, I don't care how they protect it. If they're doing a search of your person, it's a violation without a warrant based on probable cause. This is a violation of the Fourth Amendment, and that is totally missing. Now, I did another episode on airport biometrics back in December. And just pulling this link up here from the episode, it was TSA's Dangerous Roadmap for Airport Surveillance. This was on December 12th of 2018. And the reason I wanted to pull up this episode is because in that one, I was covering how they intend to actually do this type of thing for all passengers. So what we're hearing right now, though, is that this is going to be for international travel. And I'm sure some people's first thought is like, well, the border's a real problem. Got to come up with something. We're not getting a wall. This is an electronic surveillance wall of some sort. Maybe some people are thinking that. But I can't think of a government program, I cannot think of it, where they say it's going to start out with just this, and it ends up always only being just that. The worst example, of course, is the income tax, which was going to just be targeting a few percentage points of the few percentage points of the richest people. Well, how does that play out? That is one thing. Of course, the Patriot Act was only going to apply to the terrorists. I mean, we can go through the list of this type of thing. And there are so many things that the federal government has done, that government in general does, that once you give them a new baseline, they don't go back on it. John Adams famously wrote years before the revolution, he said, liberty once lost is lost forever. That doesn't mean people will never get it back, but he was very specific when he said, once you allow government to take your liberty or invade an area of your liberty that doesn't allow you to exercise it, it'll never give it back willingly. And in fact, it always gets worse. So I'm on the side, and he wasn't the only one on that either. George Washington, in his farewell address, famously said, when you turn a blind eye to new government powers that would violate the Constitution, ostensibly because you either agree with the short-term outcome, or long-term outcome, I guess, because you agree with it, or it's too difficult to resist it, eventually they're going to turn that into a tool of total oppression. So let's quickly review, for those of you who either did not see that episode or maybe just as a refresher, I want to quickly look at what the TSA's roadmap is for biometric surveillance at airports. So they do point out in this article, and this was from December of 2018, while Congress has authorized a biometric data collection exit program for foreign visitors, Congress, signed by Barack Obama, let's keep that in mind. Obama signed this into law, supposedly to help monitor visa compliance by using biometrics to track foreigners leaving the country. The roadmap, and these are documents from the TSA, the roadmap explicitly outlines plans for TSA and Customs Border Protection to collect any biometrics they want from all travelers, American or foreign, international and domestic, wherever they are in the airport. That data will be stored in a widely shared database that could be used to track people outside the airport context. I mean, once they have it, they're absolutely going to use it. Oh, I didn't pull this up on the video here, just so you guys can read along as I read it as well, for those of you who are watching. Again, we're being told that this is to deal with international travel and to monitor visa compliance. But at the same time, behind the scenes, and this isn't covered very much, why didn't BuzzFeed or Epic or ACLU or anybody talk about the fact that, okay, they're deploying this, but we also know that they've published a roadmap there were documents released on this as well just a few months ago that said they are going to do biometric surveillance of everyone. We're still being told this is just for the foreign people. And that's what they always tell us. It's just for them. And that's where I think it's dangerous, because once you allow government to do it to them, eventually they're going to have the power to do it to you. So again, their roadmap that the TSA published very clearly says that they're going to do biometrics collection. And I'm assuming if they're implementing facial recognition systems at the baggage check and check-in process and all that, why would they use a different version of it? Maybe they want to learn how to do iris scans. I don't know what's more effective. I was trying to do some research on this, and because, of course, Samsung has two different versions on their phone unlock systems. On some of their phones, they have iris scan and they have a facial recognition. Like, I won't get one of those phones because, of course, once you collect that, it's going to be transferred. And I've shown on this show a few times, this is my Google Pixel. I have never, ever, even inadvertently, luckily enough, I won't touch this fingerprint scanner on the phone because I know Google also can't be trusted, and they either are actively sharing the information, or as you may have heard on my NSA surveillance episode last week, government through Executive Order 12333 and Section 702 of FISA, they're tapping into the internet backbone. So once this data, even if it's stored locally, at some point, someone is going to have access to this thing. I don't trust them to be secure on this. Maybe someone can explain to me how this is totally encrypted and I can use it. I don't know. I don't trust it personally. And until I can see some kind of verification that they are not getting that data, I'm not going to use it. So that's a side note. They're going to start doing this on everybody. We're told it's used on the foreigners. When Obama signed, it was only going to be for visa compliance. Now Trump is expanding on that. It's going to sweep up some Americans. It sounds like NSA surveillance. Of course, Section 702 and EO 123, these were only supposed to be for international, foreign surveillance. But in order to do foreign surveillance, they're tapping into the backbone of the internet, and they're collecting everybody's information. So that's the same type of thing that I see playing out here. So EFF goes on to say, this is a big, big change. It is unprecedented for the government to collect, store, and share this kind of data with this level of detail with this many agencies and private partners. And it is not just the storage, the detail, and the sharing. It is the fact that they're doing unconstitutional searches. So the TSA shouldn't exist. They're searching people. I mean, I don't know the answer to it. And everyone always says, well, how do you deal with airport security? Of course, my Austrian friends will say, and mind you, for those of you who are listening, I'm not talking about Austria. I'm talking about Austrian economics, for example, like the Mises Institute or fee.org. They'll say, well, privatize it. I mean, if you're going to go on a private property, airport, you're going to go on an airplane, which is run by a private company, owned by individuals, or corporation, which is a group of individuals, then you're going to have to follow their rules before you go on their property. And maybe in that situation, there's going to be more aggressive security. But for government to do it, they just shouldn't be doing it. And in fact, maybe some areas will have less security. I don't know. I don't know how it's going to play out. I don't have an answer. That isn't my job. I am not an expert in this, but what I do know is that the Fourth Amendment means what it says it means, and violations of it are violations of it, whether they're supposedly necessary or not. Everyone has a reason why something has to be violated. We were told that a declaration of war against Iraq, for example, or against the terrorists, having to wait for that would mean that people might die in the streets. If you had to follow the founders' constitution, then millions of people would die in the streets because we couldn't get Obamacare. Now, of course, we're going to have people say, well, if you don't do this, you're going to have another hijacking. I mean, there's always an excuse, and when you allow one person to use an excuse or one group of people to use an excuse to violate the Constitution, other people are going to use that same kind of excuse, and it's going to go on and on and on. But that's really all I wanted to cover on this in detail. I wanted to make sure you guys were aware of this new program being implemented, especially because I've done a couple of episodes on this in the past on facial recognition. Oh, I also wanted to point out that I did another episode talking about how the SS, the Secret Service, has actually implemented a program to do facial recognition in and around the White House, for all we know, in large swaths of area around Washington, D.C. So they are implementing this in small areas. And the more they do this, we're going to be hearing, I expect that we're going to be hearing, they're going to implement it on in bus platforms, in public parks, at concerts, all kinds of areas. And the more that they use this, and the more that they have, I think they can get away with the errors more and more with foreign travelers. The more they do this, the more that the AI gets improved. The more the AI gets improved, the more likely they're going to have the courage to implement in larger areas with the general public and American citizens as well. So I do want to get back, say hi over to people out in the live chat. Looks like a lot of conversation here. Tyler B had a little buffering. Yeah, sometimes if there's something going on the YouTube end, I almost always get a green. When I look at the dashboard for live streaming, I get green for good health, yellow for some people might get buffering, and red where it's a mess. And I'm luckily on a fiber connection that's only wired into my building. I mean, it's a couple hundred units, but it's during the day, and there's not a lot of people who work from home like I do. So I get really, really good like gigabit connection here. So it's rare that there's a problem. So I just suggest reloading the page. Frank I says, I won't fly because of this. And I know people like my friend Jim Babb in Pennsylvania ran an organization because of the body scanner some years ago called We Won't Fly, and there was an effort to do that. Now, I have not been able to pull that off. I do opt out from that, but how can you opt out? And that was some of the talk in some of the reports that I was reading about this facial recognition, is that CBP is not really giving you an option or making it clear that you can opt out of this type of thing. But if they start putting it, let's just go back to this article from last December, that CBP and TSA, they will collect or intend to collect biometrics they want from all travelers, American or foreign, international and domestic, wherever they are in the airport. So can you imagine like a sci-fi film where they've got these scanners everywhere? Well, how do you opt out of that? You put something over your face. I think that's the only way to do it. I mean, I'll do that until they say it's against the law. And of course, there are legislators, at least on a state level. There was a guy named Jason Spencer from Georgia who wanted to make covering your face against the law. Ostensibly, this was to protect people from terrorists because only Muslims would want to cover their face. Well, again, this is something that's going to be used now against foreigners, but eventually, what's going to be our recourse against facial recognition? They'll certainly be able to monitor our gait, maybe the structure of our face, and that'll get better over time. But at least for now, if there is going to be ubiquitous facial recognition, it's cover your face. But of course, they will probably want to make that illegal in airports or not allow you to travel. So there's not much of a chance to opt out of this type of thing, and that's why it's important to be aware of it. And maybe we'll I'm not sure what the solution is, but I'm glad you guys are now aware of this. I hope you found this interesting. It is very, very scary stuff. I hope if you found it educational, you enjoyed the show today. I appreciate everyone who is here with me, either live or later on in the archives. Of course, we post the archives over to BitChute, BitTube. We post links to Minds.com, Facebook, Twitter, and of course the podcast version at iTunes, Google Play, I think Stitcher, and Spotify as well. So everyone, whether you're liking, commenting, sharing links, leaving reviews, all that stuff means a great deal to me. I am very, very thankful for that. I think it's amazing that you want to spend time with me over and over and over as we do this every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. And again, thank you so much for spending some time with me today. I hope you have a great Wednesday, and we'll see you next week or on Friday and again next week. Thanks again for watching.